Being a band director has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. But even on the good days, let's face it, being an educator isn't always easy. And there's no way I could have made it this far without the great advice, words of encouragement, and at times the tough love of some really wonderful mentors. If you find yourself needing those same things, or you just want to learn some strategies that will help you become a more effective music teacher, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Band Office. Hi there, I'm your host Andrew Jemison, and on this episode of the Band Office, we'll be discussing the expectations pre-service and young band directors have regarding what it's like to be in the classroom, and how those expectations evolve over time. Joining us this week is Mr. Sean Smith, a veteran music educator and director of bands at Rugby Middle School in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and Mr. Mike Wilson, a former state bandmasters president and retired band director from T.C. Robertson High School in Asheville, North Carolina. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you guys could take just a moment to introduce yourselves and give us a little history of your educational experience and background in music. Mike, let's start with you.
I am a native of Burnsville, North Carolina, and I went to Mountain Heritage High School. Had it not been for my high school band director, I would not have been a band director myself. And Lisa Mooney came to our county, and she started the band program. There was no band until she came, and she came my fifth grade year. And I remember her very vividly coming around to all the fifth grade classes and talked about being in band. And I had started piano lessons in the second grade. So I was not interested in the band. I thought enough of music and stuff. So I didn't sign up. And it wasn't until I was in the eighth grade, they played football until they built the new high school, Mountain Heritage, at one of the middle schools. And one Friday night, I heard a marching band from my house. And I go running up through the field, and I could look over and see the football field. And I saw the marching band, and, there was no band still at Mountain Heritage. And it turned out that it was the Brevard High School Band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I thought, I have to be a part of that. And so I had to beg Miss Mooney to let me be in the band. I went at the end of my, I guess it was the end of my seventh grade year, and told her, I wanted to do this. And she said, okay, you're in sixth grade. And I said, no, I'm going to be in the eighth grade. And she told me, well, we just can't make that work because your schedule won't work. And so I said, no, I have to do this. That's something I really want to do. And I had done my homework, and I knew all the instruments and everything. And I told her that I would even play tuba if she would let me be in the band. And so she said, sign right here. And they worked out my schedule. And that's how I got my band start. And so I was in high school band all 4 years. And she had gone to Mars Hill, so she put a slant on on my decision when I decided I wanted to be a music major and be a band director. And I went to Mars Hill, and probably the 4 best years of my life in many different ways, but certainly in music. And I had great teachers, and I know Mr. Smith will probably talk about some of those experiences that he had, because I'm much older than him, but I think we probably shared a few of the same teachers. Mr. Babley and Dr. Presley were 2 mentors of mine, and just gave me a very good foundation. And if I've had any success in this business, it would certainly be because I was fortunate enough to be around those 2 gentlemen and many other faculty members at Mars Hill. I graduated from Mars Hill, and I did go on to the University of Illinois, and I did my master's degree up there. And that was a very eye-opening experience. It was a lot different. There were about 38,000 kids there at the time on campus, and over 600 in the music department. And so going from Mars Hill to Illinois was a huge culture shock. But I can honestly say that I did not have one class at Illinois that we hadn't discussed pretty much everything at Mars Hill. I mean, as a matter of fact, Mr. Babley used one of the books with one of the teachers I had for instrumental music methods, Dr. Susan Hensley, the class that we had with her, the Foundations of Music Education. Dr. Leonard had wrote the book that we used in her class. He was the chairman of the graduate music program. So I guess I had a little advantage because we had used some of their books. But I think back now that the education that I got, I wonder sometimes why I wasn't a better band director. But anyway.
Now, you can't leave out the most important part of your biography, which is you and I are related, right?
Yes, that is true.
Right.
I think we're probably about fourth cousins, third or fourth.
That's cool.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was my grandmother and your great-grandfather.
Yeah. They were brother and sister, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now there's a whole lot of stories that I've never even heard, a lot of information. We're only, like 2 or 3 minutes into this thing, and I've gotten a whole lot out of it already.
Well, Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My career, kind of the same deal, and I'll just kind of trace back, but it's kind of interesting because I'm teaching where I went to school now. So I'm teaching at Rugby, which was a junior high back in the day. And I'm telling you right now, I was terrible. I was last chair. I had no idea how to play the trombone. My dad and my older brother and sister, my sister had a flute. My brother had played the trombone, and they'd both gone through the program here at West Henderson. And my dad was like, I'm not buying another instrument. He said, son, you can pick between the two. So I was like, well, I guess I'll try this trombone thing. And it was pitiful looking. You know, everybody on that first day got their shiny horn out, and mine looked like it had been shot with a shotgun, smelled to me. But, you know, I came through the program, and I just had no idea what I was doing for that first year. And I basically followed the guy next to me, and he was clueless. I was clueless. He was clueless. So I was a beat behind him and more clueless, you know, like, so it was pretty pitiful. My mom got me some lessons with somebody named Key Garvin, who had retired from the Army band. He was a trombone soloist with the Army band. And I started taking private lessons. And so when I got back, I started in the 7th grade. When I got back in the 8th grade, I beat everybody in my section, which wasn't really very hard to do, but you know, it kind of pointed me in the right direction. I had Bob Edwards as a band director. We were not very good, but I enjoyed it, and so I was like, I must be okay at this. So then I went on to high school, and John Dixon had just started at West Henderson. He was a Mars Hill graduate. And I wound up going through that program. And I actually, you know what, I took a gap year before a gap year was a thing. You know, now it's like a big deal, but I took a gap year after I graduated high school. And I kind of was, you know, like trying to figure out which way I wanted to go. Some friends suggested that you always loved playing trombone, you know, why don't you go? And so I went and I auditioned at Mars Hill, and I got a scholarship, and I kind of started my path. And my mom and my dad are both educators, and they really didn't want me to go into education whatsoever. But I think my dad finally realized, like, you know, this must be something that's really important to him. And it really was. And like Mike, I think I just got really, really lucky. I got to Mars Hill at the right time. You know, like there was some really great teachers there who mentored me through my whole career. Not only were they there, but people like Mike and Fran and Mike Robinson and, you know, WC and Jerry and all of these people, Buddy, all these people around the area, because you went to Mars Hill, it's like you were in the fraternity, you know, like they just said, this person went to my alma mater, and I'm going to take care of that person. And they really did. So when I first started working, after I graduated from Mars Hill, I moved to Raleigh, and I worked in Oxford, North Carolina. I didn't even know there was an Oxford, North Carolina until I got a job there. And I worked there for a year and a half, and I came back. I'd student taught with WC at East Henderson, and he decided to leave, and he said, "I want you to come and take my job." And so I did. And that kind of started it. I was back in Western North Carolina, and I could call on all of these people to help me as
Yeah.
I moved forward. I think I get a strong work ethic from my dad. My dad and my mom were both really, really hardworking people. They were both farmers growing up. And so I think my work ethic comes from them. And I don't really like to do stuff poorly. I think I get that from them too. But I worked at East for about 12 years in high school. And then I went to AC Reynolds in Asheville. I was there for 10 years. And my dad is now currently 92 years old. And my daughter had just graduated high school, and my principal was retiring. And I just thought this would be a good time for me to take a couple of steps back and help my dad some. So
Mhm.
now I am in my first year teaching middle school, and it is a completely different animal, but I'm having a great time because I'm learning so much. And I think as educators, that learning component for all of us is so important. And it's just been a lot of fun for me. Like, I mean, whoever thought, like, man, I really get to check out some middle school music. As a high school
Right.
band director, you're like, no, it's not something I'm really too excited about. But I have been thrilled. It's been such a great time. But the one thing that I will say above anything else, and I think Mike touched on this too, I have just been blessed and just lucky to be around the people I've been around, to learn from them, and then just have great administrators and students, because
Right.
they've just been really, throughout my career. I can just look back and go, man, God, that was just perfect timing. And yeah, I mean, I just think that all of those things kind of encapsulate just what makes you, a good educator. So, but I'm telling you right now, I learn stuff all the time still, and it's awesome. I love that our jobs are never the same. It's always a different group of kids, a different set of issues, or
Mhm.
like I think that's really cool. And figuring that puzzle out is always awesome.
Absolutely. There's certainly never a dull moment with band students. Well, let's dive into our topic of conversation for this episode, which is the expectations versus the reality of teaching. I can remember thinking back on those undergraduate years at Appalachian. I had a preconceived idea of what teaching would be like. I thought that the majority of my job was going to be studying scores and conducting a band, and the reality is that that's just a small part of what we do every day. Thinking back to your earlier years as an undergraduate or even as a student teacher, did either of you experience anything similar to that?
When you're in college, it's lots of pedagogy, music history, you're practicing. For me, anyway, a lot of the classes that you have, student teaching or being a band director wasn't really discussed that much, except in the band class with Mr. Babley. He would tell stories. He had been a high school band director before he came to Mars Hill, and he would, talk about that. But we didn't talk about that in music theory, and we didn't talk about that in music history. We did talk about it some, and I guess in our methods classes. But I was very fortunate to get to student teach with Mike Robinson, and everybody. I mean, there was like 10 or 11. I don't remember how many instrumental people there were going out to student teach that spring, but you had to write down where you wanted to go. Like, you had to put down 3 different places. And looking back, I'm really surprised that I got to go to Asheville High, because there were certainly better musicians, better players than me. But he did take 2, me and Charles Holland, and we got picked to go to Asheville High. And I thought, well, I must be better than I give myself credit. It was years later on down the road when I realized, no, they sent you there because you needed to go there and you needed Mike Robinson in your life. And so I had a very positive student teaching experience. And, it was intimidating, though, to stand up in front of those Asheville High kids. Asheville High had more students than Mars Hill had. So, just walking on that campus and graduating from a very small rural high school was eye-opening for me. But Mr. Robinson was a great mentor in every aspect. But I learned a lot from him. And so I tried very hard when I had student teachers to give them the same kinds of opportunities that I had had at Asheville High with Mr. Robinson. I'm sure I failed miserably at times, but my student teaching experience was very positive, and I wouldn't have traded that semester away for anything.
Sean, what about you?
I remember getting kind of a discussion. They were discussing where I would go for student teaching, because back we didn't, I don't even think, be honest with you, I don't even think we had a list. I think it was just like, who can we get to take a student teacher, And I remember I was talking to Denise Schmidt, I think at the time. She goes, I think we're going to send you to East Henderson with Mr. W.C. Lanning. And I knew of him, a little bit, but I didn't know him super duper well. I think the thing that I definitely remember was, and this is kind of a funny story. I remember I told it when W.C. got inducted into the Hall of Fame. I remember I showed up on the first day, and he had ordered a drum major podium, and he said, listen, I need you to put this together. I'm pretty sure that, it called for like a wrench and a screwdriver and so on. He handed me these tools, which none of it worked, none of it was what I needed to actually put the thing together. And I know full and well, knowing him now, he absolutely did that on purpose to me, just to watch me flounder. And, something that should have taken me probably all of 30 minutes probably took me about 2.5 hours to actually complete. But by God, by the time I was finished, that thing had gotten put together. Now, I told the drum major, I remember after that, I told the drum major, I said, now, you might want to be careful when you climb on that thing for the first time. But you know what? He was so much fun and such a good person, such a strong musician. My whole program after that was modeled after what I learned with him.
Right.
So as soon as I finished, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I was really lucky because he was in a great program. So I could just say, man, there were so many things that I just never had thought about, especially the clerical side of all of it. Like Mike said, you study the music and the pedagogy and all that. Well, that part I was probably okay with. It was just like the paperwork side, like you just hadn't even never thought about how to fill out a PO. Nobody even showed me how to do that stuff. Nobody sat down and said, write out this lesson plan, So
Right.
those are all those things that I think you just don't get covered. And then the other piece to me was I had been working really, really hard to become a better musician on my instrument. And that was no longer a part of the music process. Now, it wasn't that I just put my instrument down and didn't play it anymore, because I did. But, you went from this being the way you created and made music on an individual basis, and now you have this canvas that you're like, okay, well, you're supposed to paint on this, and you don't really necessarily have all the tools to be able to do that with.
Right.
I think as a new teacher. And so that takes a little bit of time to go, God, like I wished I'd have paid a little bit more attention when they were talking about the clarinet and the flute and the so on and so forth, because those are things that you just kind of learn in the trenches. And by golly, if you don't learn it, you figure out real well after you go to a festival or two and you come home with a 3 or a 4. So I think that was my biggie, was probably just not really knowing for sure how much went into the logistics part of it. And you just get it and you get good at doing it. But a lot of it's trial and error. And Lord knows I screw up every single day, even now. Now, not the same large mistakes that I made to begin with, but I think it's that piece that I just was like, whoa, just wasn't quite ready for.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to student teach with Randy Ingold at West Caldwell High School in Lenoir, North Carolina. And Randy was such a phenomenal teacher, such a phenomenal band director, and he could take any ensemble and make them sound good and get the kids excited about playing music. Now, he wasn't the greatest at paperwork and clerical things, but he made sure that I knew how important it was to do those things correctly and in a timely manner. And he also made sure I knew a little bit about instrument repair. During my first week of student teaching, he said, here's a clarinet and it needs some attention. And so we took all the keys off, repadded some things, recorked each joint, and put it back together. And I was overwhelmed at the time, but I'm so glad that he made me do things that I wasn't comfortable with and hadn't done. I learned so much from that one semester of student teaching that I didn't get in any other part of my undergrad experience. And it's just, student teaching is such a valuable time. I really wish that it could be a full year instead of just a semester, because it's that important. Okay, moving along to our next question. When you have had student teachers, were there certain positive traits or characteristics you noticed in those who were more successful? And do you think you can tell whether or not a student teacher is going to be a good educator later on during that clinical teaching period?
When I first started teaching, I was out in the far western part of the state. I taught at Andrews and Robbinsville, and I didn't have a student teacher the whole time I was out there. And I guess I was out there around 11 or 12 years. Uh-huh. I certainly understand why. Closest school was Western, but you were still a good hour and 15 minutes or so from Western. And, that's a lot of driving for kids. And so I really didn't, mm-hmm. I didn't have any student teachers until I came to Robertson. But once I got to Robertson, I had one just about every spring, occasionally in the fall. But, and I had very good ones. I have to admit, I had some really good student teachers. And I think it does go back. Most colleges, I think, do a pretty good job of preparing students, on the music aspect of it, conducting, things like that. You don't know what kind of rapport a student teacher is going to have with your kids until they get there and start doing it. I always told my kids when we were going to have a student teacher, I would just say, look, Mr. So-and-so's coming, Miss So-and-so's coming, and you're going to need to help them out. They're not going to be me. And you need to put yourself in their situation that someday, if you go to school somewhere and you're ready to graduate, you're going to have some kind of maybe an internship. If you're going to be a doctor, you're going to have to do residency and all this stuff. And you might appreciate somebody being kind to you and not giving you a whole lot of grief. And my kids were, for the most part, they were sympathetic, I guess is the word, with student teachers. But I like I said, I really did have some good ones, and I felt like most of them were prepared. Whether or not you can tell, I think you can tell in, a month or so. Whether or not it's going to work, and not always, but I think you can get a pretty good idea as to whether or not they will be successful. If they're open and willing to learn and willing to take criticism and try to learn on those things that we were talking about a minute ago, the non-band things, the clerical stuff. I made a special effort. One of the nicest things Randy Taylor, who was our music dealer at Robertson, ever said to me, he said, I never have to worry about you paying your bills, getting your POs in on time, doing that. But I had a secretary at Robertson when I first came there. She made it real clear that I would not be doing anything out of the ordinary when it come to ordering something. Everybody in that school followed the rules, or you dealt with Miss Judy. That's her name. And, it was, I have to say, probably a little more relaxed in when I was at Robbinsville, because there was just one school, one high school. And, but when I came to Buncombe County, it's a much larger system. There's 6 high schools, and, eventually there were 7 middle schools. And so things had to be more accurate, I guess, and done in a timely fashion. That's not to say that Mr. Taylor didn't save me a time or two. And that is certainly something that new teachers and people who are going into this business, you better make friends with the secretary, the custodian, and your music dealer, because they are the 3 people who can help you out in many ways. But, it's important to make a good impression. I've written a lot of letters of reference for new teachers, when they got out and applied for a job. I know when I had Mr. Young, and I'll just use his name, I hope he won't mind, but he applied for the position at Asheville Middle. And I had gone to Mars Hill. The principal at the time was a Mars Hill graduate, and she was a music major. She was a voice major. And she called me up and asked about Kevin. And I said, he'll be fine, but he's a new teacher. And I said, you will not just send him down to that band room, even though he was going to be working with, I guess it was Amy, and just let her be responsible for him. You're his principal. And I think he'll be a great teacher, but he'll be a new teacher, and he's going to need your mentoring and guidance. And so she did hire him, and it worked out. He did a very good job while he was at Asheville Middle, and does a good job over at Inca. But I would say to new teachers and student teachers who want to become teachers, you've got to be willing to take some sometimes harsh criticism. And I would say, get to your school on time. Nothing irritates principals more, and irritated me. I mean, that was one of the things I told a student teacher, if I'm going to drag in here at 7:00, you're going to be here by 7:30.
Right.
And like I said, I was lucky. I did not have any issues with any of the student teachers that I had. So a lot of them are still teaching today. Some of them have moved on into administration. They do things, but they're still in education. And, that happens with lots of teachers. But it happens occasionally with band directors, I think, more often in other subject areas. But occasionally you have a band director that goes over to the dark side.
Oh, yeah. I think I've lost track of how many PE teachers I've had as an administrator.
Exactly. I'll let you use that.
Okay. Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
I think Mike kind of touched on a lot of it. When I first started working, I guess I'd been teaching for about 3.5, 4 years. And I was asked by Mars Hill to take a student teacher. And that kind of started it. And so I've been really lucky, because I've met a lot of great kids through student teaching, and I've made a lot of good friends that way too. I think WC probably knew that either I was going to just give up with that goofy drum major podium, or I was going to see it through. And so even on that first day, even though it was probably kind of a joke for him, he probably thought, well, let me see what this kid's made of.
Yeah.
And he had his own way of doing that. And that for him, probably, I would hope that he was like, well, all right, I think I can trust this kid.
Right.
I like to try and meet them all now, because I used to just say, okay. And then you'd get sometimes kids that weren't necessarily as prepared. But I also think, like Mike kind of hit on it, the relationship that you have with a student teacher too, I think is really important. I think as long as kids know that they don't know anything going into it, they know what they've been taught in college, but you just don't know about the job. The more that they can understand that they don't know squat going in, then the better it's an experience it's going to be for them. Because then, like Mike said, sometimes you're going to get criticized and you may not like what it is, but we're not doing it for ourselves. We're trying to help move forward because honestly, this is your classroom now.
Mhm.
And if you got a bad grade on a test in math, you might get a bad grade on rehearsing said piece. We all went through it. We all sat up in front of the group and didn't know what we were doing from time to time. And we floundered and we looked like fools and we grew from that. And I think kids just going in just need to know I don't know much. I need to use this as a learning experience all the way
Exactly.
and be true and be honest with themselves about that too, because that to me will just set a kid up for failure. The times those to me were the kids that I saw like, I'm not sure how this is going to go because this person already thinks that they can do it. And those were the folks that I always was like, this person's going to struggle maybe a little bit. I also had folks that were maybe just a little bit too timid about it too. As long as you just are willing to get in there and get your hands dirty, I think you're going to be a successful director. And just like Mike said, I mean, there's so many kids that you see out there now, and you're like, God, such and such has really turned into a great educator. And that's really awesome to see. That to me is just, again, another part where you get to see a kid go out, turn into a band director and be successful. And you're like, maybe I had a teeny bit to do with that. And to me, that again is just a really cool thing to experience as a teacher.
Yeah, I am fortunate enough as well to have WC in my life as a mentor and someone who's really been there since the beginning of my career. And one of the first lessons that he taught me, maybe even as a student teacher, was these first 5 to 7 years of your career, you just be quiet and you listen. And every time you're in a district meeting, every time you're around more experienced band directors at the dinner table, you just listen and you soak up as much knowledge as you can from these people and make sure that you're around the best teachers that you can be around all the time. And honestly, as a young teacher, I can remember thinking, I have things that I can contribute. I don't need to just listen. But he was right. And it's a very valuable lesson and it was at times a tough lesson that I had to learn. It was a humbling lesson in many ways, but he was absolutely right. And I cannot say thank you enough to him for how much that has helped me throughout my entire career. And during student teaching, Randy Ingold was very much the same way. I went in thinking I was going to be conducting, 4 or 5 pieces at the spring concert. And he said, no, you're going to conduct one. And the rest of the time is going to be spent learning other things that you need to know how to do to be a successful band director. And I wasn't upset by that at all. With Randy, he knew that I could rehearse an ensemble. It was the other things that he wanted me to be successful with. I think he, and many teachers do, just want to see the student teacher that we have be successful and leave our school a little more prepared to go into the field than they were when they started. All right, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self something that you have learned throughout your career, something that's very valuable that maybe you didn't know as a young beginning teacher, what would that be?
The one thing I think that I would do, though, is I would never, ever not push my kids to try and achieve more. Because there were so many times, I think, in my career that I was a little bit more conservative with it. And when I say that, I'm talking about musically conservative. I wanted to always have a great product, even if that was maybe at the expense of something musically. Picking a piece that I knew was probably going to get the job done, but maybe not necessarily the greatest piece of music ever written, or taking a risk. Especially these last few years when I was at Reynolds, I mean, I loved going to MPA, and I just wanted to make it the best musical performance we could make it. And I really wished, and when I was going into my career, that I would have felt that way then, because I think I just at sometimes just played it a little bit more safe than I should have. And it's music, and God, like what, just to be able to experience that and get those chills, like, and give those kids that same experience. Not to say that I sold everybody short, because I don't want to sound that way, but I think I would have just, I don't think that I would have worried so much about a rating.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that too, because I always told myself, well, that wasn't really the important reason, but like, it's there, it's in the back of my mind. But I'm in a middle school, and I don't know what in the Sam hell I'm doing with middle schoolers, but we're going to go to a festival and we're going to try, damn the torpedoes. We're going to go for it and see what happens. And I think there were, again, some times where I played it a little bit too safe, and I don't want to do that anymore. So
I agree with everything you said. I think, especially when you first start out teaching, we want to be successful. I mean, I wanted to be successful the first day I taught. I wanted to be successful the last day I taught 30 years later. But sometimes I feel like when Sean was saying that, music that I picked for the groups, especially early on, was probably a little bit safe. They probably could have done more, but I was afraid, I guess. I wanted, like I said, I let me wanting to be successful be more important than having that musical experience and having those chills. I mean, it was more, I guess, a technical aspect of the performance that I thought, I got to get all the right notes. I've got to play the right rhythms. I will do the crescendo at measure 37. I will do the retard at measure 92,
Right.
Follow the playbook. And, I think you do have to do that if you are going to attend an MPA, or you're probably one of those three judges will probably have something to say about it. They will appreciate, anything that you do extra, if you take a chance here and there or a risk, whatever. But, there's a lot of pressure, and I felt a whole lot of pressure, when you would go to MPA or even at concerts. I would have, it wasn't, once I got to Robertson, some of my friends and colleagues would show up. I will never forget, I had first cousins of Frank Kelly in my band, and just found out. And so he graciously came one. I don't know if, Sean, if you were there at that concert or not, but I was an absolute nervous wreck, and we were playing Shenandoah, and I had worked with this kid, and Frank Kelly come in and said, no, I want you to do it this way. And, he's so musical and great. And my kid crashed and burnt at the concert. It was just, I was sort of, oh. But that kid had that experience, though, with Frank Kelly, the person who had wrote that piece and many others. And I wish, there has to be a certain amount of stress and pressure, and you wanting to do the very best that you can do. But sometimes I think that gets out of balance a little bit. And that's kind of what I think Sean was saying, that it's not always the perfect performance that is maybe the most musical performance, and that the kids enjoyed the most, and the audience. I tried very hard to pick music that the people who were sitting in the audience, my band parents, it's hard for them to appreciate every piece maybe that we played. So I always tried to put something in there for them, but I wish I had been a little more attentive to those kinds of things when I was younger. And I think I did do a better job at it later on, I guess, when I felt like I had established myself, and that, I'm going to do this. This is what I think is right, and right for the kids, and right for my program. And if that's not making, 3 MPA judges or 3 marching band judges or whatever, not making them happy, as long as I feel like my kids are having a musical experience, or as Dr. Leonard would say at Illinois, he would say, have a moment. At least have a moment in every performance that you do. I wish I had been a little more attentive in that area, I guess.
Yeah, it is a balancing act, and you do have to find that line where you're continuing to grow as a teacher, but you're also pushing your students to be the best that they can at all times. Let's talk a little bit about some challenges that you may have had throughout your career. Was there any moment where you ran across something that you just were not prepared for? And how did you tackle that issue?
It's a challenge almost every day. Some ways. I mean, I think the thing that I always hoped, but I finally accepted the fact there was always one section, sometimes two sections, that maybe weren't as strong as the rest of the band. And you had to compensate and find a way. And that goes to picking music to where everybody in the room could be successful. When your trumpets are weak and the rest of the band is strong and they're wanting to play something, that was always real difficult for me to encourage the trumpets to try and get better, encourage them to practice to where they could contribute the same way the rest of the band was contributing. And then there's just challenges with kids. We don't know very much about the kids that walk through our door and what their home life is like and the challenges and the things that they have to face. And sometimes I could have done a better job trying to know maybe a little bit more about them and what was going on outside the band room. I did try very hard to know what was going on in their other three periods with their other teachers. And sometimes their teachers felt compelled to come down to the band room and say, so-and-so's fell in my class. Do you have any influence over them? I will just say the hardest thing that I dealt with in my 30 years is when you lose kids.
Oh, yeah.
That's never easy. And in the 30 years that I taught, I lost 3 students. And, that's very difficult. And I don't know. I don't know if Mr. Smith has, or if you have lost students, but the times that happened, music saved us. Being able to play and reflect on the time that you have with those kids, and those kids, their friends, that helps. That music can help you with that. But it puts a lot of things in perspective. That's for sure. Yeah. So just getting up in the morning sometimes and dragging in was a challenge. But you get up and you go on because you have a responsibility.
That's right.
I remember having lost some students before. Parents too,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking back when I was at Reynolds, I lost one of my board members who was a pillar in the community, firefighter, and he passed. And I mean, it was, he died in a car wreck, and then another parent, cancer. I mean, those are all things I think that going in, I never one time thought about that sort of stuff. And I think Mike kind of hit the nail on the head. You just see how insignificant some of the other things are. But at the same time, I remember calling on music to help us through those moments. And even my own mom, passing away from Alzheimer's, and me sharing that with the students. And I think I've always tried to be an open book about it, because I think kids, they want there to be a person in there too that you can relate to, and not be this wall. And so I think I've tried to always do that so that they could see that there was some vulnerability there. I think that's probably a big one, just I didn't really realize how emotionally I should have known, but I didn't really realize how emotionally invested I would become in it. And when a kid would do something wrong and you're just like, God, like why? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that, Mike was talking about being tired. I think that just a kid that does something wrong in your class, or a kid that passes away, or a parent that fusses at you or whatever, I think that emotional toil that it takes on you,
Mhm.
I think that kind of surprised me a little bit, because I just thought that I'd go into class and teach the stuff, like you said,
Right.
Drew, like this will be fine. And to do it well, like Mike did for so many years, and you have that emotional investment that you have to put in there too.
Yeah.
And that I think that surprises me, and surprised me, because, and I guess I shouldn't have been. I just didn't realize how much of it would take. Teaching my own daughter was a little bit of a surprise, because I didn't know how that was going to be, and it was great. Now it wasn't all roses, but it was wonderful, and I got to make some really wonderful musical memories with her
Hmm.
that I will never trade. And then finally, I think one of the biggest surprises I would have, and this one probably maybe was just a little bit of me being naive, but I just didn't realize how much people around me as educators and administrators and so on and so forth just didn't really know what I did,
Yeah.
and still don't, and don't even realize what we do in our classroom. I mean, that to me is just stunning, at times, where you kind of like, just like, for us, it's just like, well, this just is common sense, and they just have no earthly idea. And that, sometimes that can be a blessing, because when something doesn't necessarily go right, oh, really? Like that, they just kind of, they didn't know. They didn't know
Right.
better. And there's also moments where you're like, God, that was incredible. And they don't know that.
Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
really realize what the kids are doing right now is just like amazing. So, those are a few things I think for me that I would kind of say were a little bit like, man, I didn't expect that.
So, along the lines of surprises and challenges, I had a conversation with a former colleague the other day, a good friend of mine who is a dance teacher, and she called me just in tears. And she said, I'm done. I've reached my limit. And we had a very long conversation. And I told her that in this profession, if you're not careful, bitterness can grow and things can cause you to be jaded. And you absolutely have to do something about that when it happens, or it will drive you to that point of, I am done. And I think a lot of teachers in our society right now are at that point. Have either of you ever experienced something similar to that? And if you have, how have you dealt with it? And how did you push through that hurdle?
I would say that if you haven't had that experience, I need to meet you, because I would think that we have all been there
Mhm.
many times. And going back to what I was talking about there, it's just I think we get fed up with, we're working our tail off, and we don't, and it's not recognized. Now, whether that's, an administrator, another teacher, parents, the kids, that one will really get you when you're like killing yourself to make something happen, and the kids are not responding to what you're doing. Or they just are like, you know,
Right.
"Look, we're on our way. Hey, we worked our butts off. We went to MPA. We got a 4, and we're at McDonald's now getting a milkshake, and they don't think anything about it." I remember that was always what somebody told me too. Like, you can go and you can get your 3 or 4, and you know what? The kids aren't going to remember that 30 minutes from now, but you will
Right.
wear that. You wear that, and for us, because we are so invested in it at times, it's just really hard to swallow. And I know from my own experience, God, my dad was a principal like for 24 years, and he's been on me my entire career. Son, well, I need to get your administrative degree. And that's not what I want to do. But there were definitely times where I was like, God, maybe I should just get out of this and I can be a principal and I can get paid more and still go through the same heartaches that I'm having as a band director.
Mhm.
I think we all get there, but when it all whittles away and all of the other stuff whittles away, I can't not make music.
Right.
That for me just is a non-negotiable thing. And I think for her, she would probably again, when when all the smoke clears, she is probably so invested in dance and having done it her entire life and how important that is for her. I think she would say, yeah, I can't go without that. And maybe,
Mhm.
maybe she goes on and does something else, but I don't know. For me, I just thought, okay, I'll get over it. I'll get over it. Sometimes it takes a while too. I'm telling you right now, it might take a
Yeah.
week or a month but I think that's also just part of the career, I don't
Mhm.
think there's anybody who would say I'm 100% happy in what I do, but if they are, congratulations, you hit the lottery. Uh,
Well, I can definitely relate to that so much that I did take a year off.
Mm.
I taught, I think it was after my 7th year, maybe it was the 7-year itch or whatever. And,
Mhm.
I'll not go into all everything about it, but it's just like Sean said, music had been a part of my life. I mean, we had a piano at our house, and my mom got it, and she and my brother started taking piano lessons. But I was the one that was always on the piano, banging and playing and making up my own songs and doing my
Yeah.
own thing. And my brother, he took maybe a year or whatever. And it's just, I mean, I played piano at my church since the 4th grade. I played for a gospel group when I was in the 6th grade. And it's just always been a part of what I am. And I took that year off, but I was right back after that year. I certainly empathize with people and the dance teacher who are, struggling for whatever reason, and it can be a host of reasons, different things for different people.
Right.
I feel pretty fortunate. I had good principals most of the time, but sometimes you have to educate them, and you do it in a nice way. I will never forget. I told one of my principals one time, "You go up and down this hall for testing at the end of the year. You need to come with us to MPA." And she agreed to it. I told her when we were playing, and I made her go in the sight reading room.
Yeah.
And Ed Rooker was the judge that year, and I told him, I said, "My principal's here to learn today." He made her feel welcome, as only Ed Rooker could do, offered her a little bottle of water. And, certainly they have to be willing to learn, as
Mhm.
we all have to be. And I told her after we finished, she said, "I had no idea." I said, and I'm perfectly willing to come and stand over in the gym in the corner on a Tuesday night home basketball game and watch what you do for
Yeah.
4 hours after you've worked all day. And then you're over there in the gym, putting out fires or breaking up fights or whatever. I mean, I understand what you do. I
Mhm.
just want to make sure, and it wasn't even really so much about me. I wanted them to know what the kids
mhm.
were doing.
Right.
And then there are days when, you come in and the kids, full moon, whatever, and they're swinging from the light fixtures, and you just say, "Why do I do this? Why do I do this?" But it just, like Sean said, it's music. And, I had one of my parents, there's that WLOS Recognize a Teacher. So I can't even remember what it was called. And they show up in my classroom, and I didn't know they were coming, but you had to do this interview right off the top of your head. And she said, "What makes a good teacher?" And I said, "You have to love your subject area. You have to love what you are teaching." Now, I'd heard other people that had that honor bestowed upon them and said, "You have to love kids first." I agree. You have to love kids, the good and the bad that comes with them. But if you don't have a passion for your subject area, and whether it's music, whether it's math, whether it's science, and as we talked earlier, to continue to learn and to continue to grow in music. And I'm going to assume, I don't know about math. What I know about math, I could hold in my hand, but I know that 2 + 2 has always been 4 forever. But music, there's just so many different facets of it that you can learn and be a part of, that you have to be willing to learn and love your subject to really be a good teacher. And then certainly loving the students, and that's a big part of it too. But you have to have a passion for that music, and that's, like I said, it's what brought me back after I had taken that year off. So I certainly empathize with the dance teacher.
All right, and now it's time for questions from you, our listeners. This portion of our show is sponsored by Audish. Audish is a platform for managing any audition process, from the classroom to a region or state event. From invitations, registration, billing, and messaging, all the way through the judging, scoring, tabulation, analysis, and wrap-up reports, Audish can help you have a successful audition process. For more information, check out their website at audish.app. That's AUDISH.app. Our question this week comes from a music education major at Brevard College. Her name is Mackenzie Douglas. And Mackenzie wants to know, how much time do you allot in a younger high school band class to fundamentals and basic skill building as compared to concert and musical selection rehearsal?
If you're on like an hour and a half schedule, like a block schedule, which most schools are on now, I would spend 45 to 50 to almost to an hour on fundamentals, because I just have always been a firm believer, and I got that from WC. That is your vegetables and your push-ups and pull-ups and whatever else. To me, that's where if you want your group to be successful, that has to be daily bread kind of thing. You have to just take the time to do all that stuff. Now, if it's the week before the concert and you still can't play letter A, then you probably ought to take a little more time and do letter A.
Yeah.
But, especially with my younger concert band, and even now in middle school, I've got 67 minutes. I have an A day, B day schedule. And we have 67 minutes, 40 minutes. I'm doing fundamentals, 40 to 45 minutes, sometimes longer. And I'm sure they are like, oh, but I don't care. This is what I know is going to make you better. And these are the things. So when we get into our music, and I've tried to talk to them about it too. I'm like, so, all that stuff that I make you do at the beginning of class, now, look at how easy it's making everything that we're now trying to do in this piece of music. So I have always been a firm believer in that. Some people can do the 5-minute warm up and then start into the tunes. And that was just never my MO. That's just not how I operated ever.
Well, I would agree with that. My younger kids, especially, and like Sean said, if it's the week before the concert and you can't play some of your music, then you devote more time to that. But I use those Fussell books. I don't know if you guys use those or not. They, and Treasury of Scales and things like that. And, I tried to, that Fussell book in particular just had some of the weirdest rhythms and awkward intervals and just things that would show up in the music. And I playing scales and things. I tell the kids, all music is jumbled up scales And, I tried most of the time when whatever piece we were playing, certainly you would play that scale before we would start just for a review to, this is in the key of E flat. And I know you like B flat better, but you're going to have some A flats in this concert A flat anyway. And there are ways to make that stuff that kids perceive not as fun. There are ways that you can liven that up a little bit and make it not quite as monotonous and as boring, because it is to a certain degree. But, it has to be done.
Well, thank you, Mackenzie, for your question. We certainly appreciate you sending that in. If you're listening and have a question for our show, or you would like for us to discuss a certain topic, please feel free to send that email to thebandofficepodcast@gmail.com, or you can send us a message through Instagram at bandofficepodcast. To conclude our episode, I always like to ask my guests, do you have some words of encouragement or a final thought, or is there a mentor that you had in your life that taught you something that would be worth sharing to our audience?
Well, I'll start on this. I think of Mr. Babley. One of the best things he told us, he said, you will always be the most excited person in the room. He said, first of all, that's your job. But he said, the kids that come in there, they're not always going to be as excited about band as you are. So he was certainly a good mentor. And I must mention, too, that when I did teaching, I also taught with Pat Guerin over at Asheville Junior High. I have tremendous respect for her and Mr. Robinson both. Both of them were very influential. And I call them, I know I had Mike Robinson's number on speed dial. And he always, whatever he was doing, he dropped it and talked with me, talked me through all kinds of things. And that would be something that I would just say to, prospective band directors and new teachers. You need to find people that have been successful in this business. And you need to ask them questions and, have them come to your band room and listen to your band. And they will. I would just say and like I said, I have been very lucky that Pat Guerin was in my life, and Mike Robinson and Fran Shelton. And Miss Shelton is not that much older than me, but I have tremendous respect for her. And she has heard my band. Mr. Smith has been in my band room. They don't necessarily have to be old and retired. There's plenty of people teaching right now that are successful, and they will be willing to help you if you just have to ask. Don't be an island. There are people who will help you if you ask. And that may mean having to swallow your pride a little bit. Find people who you respect and who have a successful track record.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on to that. One of the most important lessons that I learned from Dr. Jay Jackson at Appalachian State University, he said, one of the biggest mistakes that new teachers make when they get into the classroom is they don't ask for help. And I think that could be because people are afraid for our professors and for experienced band directors out there to see our weaknesses, to see what we don't know. But that's the time that you need those people in your life, and you need those mentors, and you need those people helping you to become a better director, to become a better educator. And like Mike said, you need to make sure that the people that you bring into your classroom have a successful track record. They need to have had superior ratings, whether that's marching, jazz band, concert ensembles, what have you. And they need to not necessarily be your friends. I mean, they can be, but some of your buddies that you went to school with may have a great ear, but they may not be trained as well as they should be to give you advice or feedback. And whether you appreciate their feedback and respect their feedback or not, that's kind of a different story. But the main thing is you don't want people to come into your classroom who are going to sugarcoat things and tell you what you want to hear, either to, stay your friend or to not hurt your feelings or whatever. But you want to make sure that you're getting the honest truth, because if you don't get the truth, you're not going to get any better. You're not going to improve as a teacher, and your students are ultimately going to suffer because of that.
Yeah, I think lesson-wise, I would say the more people that you can know and listen to, you talked about taking the first 5 to 7 years and not say a word. I let people make decisions for me. I said, hey, I'm at East High now, and that's grade 6, and I don't know what I'm doing. So can you help me pick what I need to play and help me pick something that's going to keep me out of trouble? And I think things like that are invaluable because, let me put it like this. I contacted probably between 8 and 10 people to ask them what to play on the grade 2 middle school list because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm in year 25. And I'm not going to try and I don't want to screw this up,
Right.
And I think just going into it, knowing that, again, you've got to just rely on people. And Mike hit the nail on the head. It doesn't have to be somebody who's retired necessarily, albeit that their time usually seems to be a little bit more free than the rest of ours. You can ask people that are currently in it. And I think most of the time people will be happy to help you because we've all been there and we've all screwed it up a little bit or a lot. And we don't want to see somebody else do it because we've lived through it and it sucked. So I think for me, in terms of a lesson, if I could learn a lesson, it would just be to ask even more questions than I did originally. And when you're talking mentors, I think I mentioned everybody earlier. There's a list a mile long of people that I know have influenced me in one form or fashion. And it can be coming in to hear your band. It can be just having a conversation. Andrew, you and I think we drove to lunch the other day when we were at District Band. And I wanted to tell you at the end, it's so cool. And I love the conversation and I love catching up. And those are the things where you always seem to pull something away from it, and that goes for everybody. That goes for a lot of people that I'm around. And there's older, younger, there's not a time that a student teacher hadn't walked in here and taught me something.
Yeah.
Like they always know something. Generally, they're a little bit more tech savvy than me, and they can help me do that stuff. And that ain't real hard to do. And I remember I used to take my calendar. I still have a paper calendar, by the way. I just take my calendar, and I would call people in November or December, and I'm sure they were just like, "What the hell is this guy doing calling me right now?" And I would just have them like on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 weeks before MP. I would line all these people up. Anybody who would say yes, I was like, "Come on."
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. The time has come, unfortunately, for us to call it a night, and I certainly appreciate you being here. I know we could continue to talk for hours. It's always a pleasure and an honor to talk with you guys. I love spending time with you both, and so thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge with our audience.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you for asking. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us here on the Band Office. We truly hope that you find your way back to us each week to find words of advice and encouragement that will help you have a more successful time in your classroom as a music educator. You can find the Band Office on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and the Anchor app. This podcast is sponsored by the North Carolina chapter of the National Band Association. Theme music is written and performed by the Westerlies.